Internet, an indispensable factor in today's time. It is very important for any professional to have a very strong digital presence for the growth of their practice. How about we learn about this from someone who has a YouTube channel that provides some of the most practical, pragmatic solutions to everyday legal problems that will really help every lawyer and legal aspirant. Ladies and gentlemen, joining me today in this wonderful episode of the One Take Show is Mr. Amish Agarwal. Sir is a Central Government's Counsel and he's a disputes lawyer at Supreme Court of India. In this episode, he's going to talk about his experience with law, his journey through law school. He will also talk about the importance of media presence and how he encountered various benefits that come out of it. Finally, we will talk about the effects of media trial and how media trial can be devastating for certain people and how we can encounter it. Hence, ladies and gentlemen, this episode is going to add so much value to our lives. It's going to give us a lot of perspective and it's going to give us a lot of understanding. So stay tuned to the very end of this episode. Hence, let's jump right in. Hello, sir. Welcome to the One Take Show. This is a very special episode, especially for me, because now I have this podcast to share with someone who I've really looked up to, especially when it comes to their presence on digital sphere. Your YouTube channel specifically provides us with this wonderful, practical, real-life legal knowledge when it comes to law students, really cherishing those moments. So thank you so much for taking time off your very busy schedule and sitting down with me on this Sunday morning and talking about all the things that we will cover today. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, brother. I mean, the weather is fantastic. This is like we just needed to be in person to grab like a couple of biscuits, tea, and shoot the shit. But, we make the best of what we can, right?
Well, most certainly we do. Before we get into the various aspects of our conversation that we have planned and lined up today, I would love to know about your journey in toto, as in what inspired you towards law and what was your experience with law school. Was there any standout experiences in law school that somehow inspired you to move towards litigation and craft the career that you have?
Sure, man. I mean, I'd love to say that I had this XYZ incident back when I was very, very young, which just set the path right for me. Fact of the matter is I am a third generation lawyer, and but one thing, what is interesting is when people ask me that did you do law just because everyone in your family is a lawyer. I said actually the fact that everyone in my family is a lawyer, they used to encourage me not to do law. So my father, in fact, pushed me into taking up science as a subject rather than commerce in class 11th and 12th, because he said we'd rather prefer you to be anything else but a lawyer, because we know how difficult it is for a lawyer. No matter how, no matter what kind of backing you have, no matter what kind of connections you have, you still have to suffer a lot. You have to go through a lot, and we would prefer for you not to do it. However, I chose to do law, but my reasons for doing law were very different. So when people say my father was a lawyer, I used to see him practice, matters in the court and read his books. I used to feel inspired. My problem was my father was a very active member of the Bar Council of Delhi and subsequently the Bar Council of India for several years. So during my formative years as a high school student, my father was mostly busy with the Bar Council work for the fraternity. And the difficulty with that is that, you get very little time to practice law and you're spending much more time cracking down on law schools and lawyers with errant behavior. Right. The reason I used to feel an attraction towards law was because I used to, see all these people come in the office and, the residence office and keep going, Vakil Sahab, Vakil Sahab. So I thought to myself, all right, this is some place where you get a lot of respect. You get the adoration, the validation of a lot of people. And that is the reason why I kind of went into law. But of course, you get into it and then you realize that the fame, the fortune is for very few. And that too, after a long amount of painful, frustrating, time spent in the field. But I did kind of really enjoy litigation, and I still do. A big reason being, believe it or not, I'm actually quite a big introvert, and I've always been that. And I saw litigation, making my submissions in a court of law, and to take up difficult matters, challenging matters, as a way to be able to kind of get over my introvertedness. So that's something that I kind of I feel very grateful for. I mean, I can only imagine if I went into a more like a job where I did not have to speak much, I
Right.
would kind of still always hold this feeling of being an introvert inside me, and I would not be able to challenge myself to grow bigger. And even in high school, my high school friends will tell you how much of an introvert I was. I never did a debate, I never did any sort of public speaking ever. I In my 11th class, I tried to participate in the debating, to get into the debating society. And I remember in my particular classroom, there were 6 people who had applied for the debating society for the classroom, and 5 people could be selected, and I was the one who I was the only one who did not get selected.
Wow.
So it was a nightmare, so much so that even in law school, the first and the second year, the fact that I never did anything in high school kind of discouraged me from doing anything in law school as well. It was only when I think in my third year of law school that I finally went to a moot court competition. Had some interesting things happen, and then I kind of took my journey of doing everything, and even then carrying on an interest in litigation after that. When you talk about law school was a lot of fun, but I wish, especially when I look at law students like you right now and other young lawyers, and I see the kind of fantastic work people are doing right in their first year of law school and onwards, I feel, first and foremost, I feel so jealous about all the incredible things you guys are doing, and I wish I could have started earlier myself. But I say better late than never. Frankly, I never did much of studying in law school. I never really internships were there. I was diligent enough to keep running around and doing the stuff. I kind of knew that disputes is where I'm going to be at for the rest of my life, and that's why I kept doing litigation internships. I did internships with some decent people, some good firms as well. So they were quite enriching experiences. What was the clincher was working with my uncle, who is also a senior special public prosecutor for one of the government departments. So I worked for him for about 3 years after graduating. That really, all of the complacency of law school was kind of washed away, because he picked me up, threw me into the deep end of the ocean, and said, now you have to swim back to the shore. That's what he did with the practice, because with him, it's his philosophy in his entire chamber. And almost the entire family of lawyers has at one point interned or been an associate in the chambers of my uncle, including my father, my Tauji's children, other relatives. So almost everybody. In fact, it's funny, there have been a lot of occasions, and my uncle has spent so much time in this profession, and the kind of work that he does. There have been several occasions that I've spoken with a person, and they say, oh, I actually interned, or I actually worked with your Tauji for a couple of months, or maybe a year or two.
That must be interesting.
I went to that's always quite funny to hear that your first boss has been the boss to dozens and dozens of people. But the interesting thing about my uncle and his practice was that he encourages, in fact, it's not even an encouragement, it's a mandate, that him being a government servant, he has several matters in a day. So he says that when I entrust you with a file, when I know that it is not the most high stakes matter today, so I'm going to be picking the most high stakes matters, and the rest of the matters you will do, and I don't care whether you win or you lose. I just care about the fact that the judge and the opposing counsel should not laugh at you in the court. You should not have anyone laugh at you. That's the only consideration. And apart from that, you win, you lose, it doesn't matter. You just give it your best, but you should be ready enough so that nobody mocks you ever. That's the only consideration. So because of that, I used to run, I used to fall every single day. I used to go toe to toe with senior advocates, with senior lawyers every single day at the Delhi High Court, and that really kind of put me through trial by fire and forged me into at least a halfway decent lawyer that I can call myself today. Apart from that, what else? I think that's it. That's like my journey.
It's a very
Law student, lawyer.
It's a very
Yeah.
interesting story of yours. I think the fact that you've had the kind of a background which will actually push you, give you the kind of a guidance, and also expose you to the realities. I think it's very important. Also, I believe would give you a perfect position in order to answer the various concerns that now surface from law students. Is that how can law students, while they are in the law school, or if either they've graduated or trying to enter into the industry, can make the best of their time, acquire certain set of skills or do whatever they can to actually make it in litigation. So what advice do you have for them?
My goodness, dude, get on the internet for God's sake. I
Mm-hmm.
think I think the biggest reason why I never did anything was because, I mean, I think I mean, I have a family full of lawyers, but it's not that, at the very beginning, like I like my father would come up to me, who's interestingly standing in front of me right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that my father would come to me on my first day of
Good
law
morning, sir.
school and say, "Beta, you have to you have to make use of every minute that you have in law school so that you can be well prepared for what is there when you get out of it." In fact, I remember a batchmate of mine met my father at an occasion, at a formal occasion, and he introduced himself and said that, I'm batchmates with your son. And my father had to take perhaps 30 seconds to remember the name of my law school. And my friend told me that, your father was not able to remember your law school's name. And he's like, so I told him the name of the law school, and then your father said, "Ha ha, theek hai. Ab jo bhi hai, it's after his 5 years of law school that he will do what he has to, and we'll see what has to happen." So it was a very, I mean, it's not that I had anybody to kind of push me in that direction and say, let's do this. That never really happened. But now, I mean, I just look at all the people who are coming on the internet, right? There's you doing this incredible thing with the podcasts. There are so many students doing videos, doing articles, reaching out to people. I never could imagine. I mean, LinkedIn, I remember the first year of my law school was in 2008. And I think I used to carry one of those, Samsung touch phones, which, you do nothing. I mean, there's no connectivity on the internet. YouTube was also a couple of years away.
Mm-hmm.
So, there are so many opportunities now which you can find out about when you're on the internet. And when it comes to, and I've in fact, the past couple of days, I don't know if you're in those kind of circles on LinkedIn or not, but nowadays, the past couple of days, there's this huge debate going on about the unfairness, the nepotism in litigation. I think,
Yeah.
especially because of the whole Sushant Singh Rajput situation,
Mm-hmm.
everybody's talking about nepotism. And I kind of restrained myself from writing a post about it, because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whenever I talk about it, people say, you are privileged, you have an office, you have an infrastructure, you have a family full, you have guidance, you have all of these things, you don't even get to say anything. And
Mm-hmm.
frankly, I have seen, and this is a conversation I was having with a friend yesterday. They say that you should give a little, money to your interns, your associates. Always, you should always, you should have a more nourishing environment for the people who are entering the profession. I said, life is not fair for anybody. Like, if I today want to get into the NBA, right, I cannot do that, and I cannot say that I want to get into NBA. I want to be coached by Michael Jordan, or maybe or maybe some other, like, super basketball star, like, Allen Iverson or LeBron or someone like that. I can't, right? And similarly, if, I mean, chalo, anyway, usko side rakhte hain. How can students and lawyers, do something to maximize their potential? I think moot courts, debates, all of these things are fine. I think the best thing you can do is to start creating content the way you are doing, right? I think what you are doing is the best thing you can do, because
Thank you.
People can reach out to you. People can reach out to, seniors in the fraternity to secure a job. People can do a bunch of things, but it's always about, I think, standing out from the crowd, doing something that sets you apart. And I think the best way, in whatever form, on whichever social media platform, is to just create content, right? Be it articles, be it research papers, be it videos, be it podcasts, be it, I say, if nothing else, just start writing and compiling your thoughts and put it out there. put it out there.
Right.
And I talk to so many law students and lawyers, and especially in this lockdown time right now, there have been so many people who call me up and say that I feel completely, complacent, dejected. I have no direction in life. There's no law school to go to. And, what do I do? What do I do? Because I've read my books, I'm reading, but I don't feel like reading them. And I think the only answer that I have for everybody is to create, and not even create content, just create. Create anything which is relevant to your field. If you're a doctor, create on medicine or surgery or whatever it is you're doing. If you're into gardening, just create on gardening. And if you're a lawyer or a law student, just create on the law. And that's what I've been doing. That's what a few of my contemporaries are doing. And I think that's the best way to get out there. The things that you do, right? The fact that you reached out to me, that we had a good chat, that we exchanged some opinions, you gave me some good ideas about how to proceed, like how to start my podcast. Because of that, I'm quite confident that we'll have a relationship for life now. We'll be connected for life because of the fact that yes, and I'm sure you must have had the same response from all the other people who you've reached out to as well, right? There's an instant connection that happens. There's an instant bond, and now you can take it forward. There can be work that I can refer to you. There can be jobs that I can refer you to. I can introduce you to my network. There are all these things which are possible just because you took the initiative, got out of your comfort zone, put yourself out there. I'm sure for every maybe 50 people who tell you that you're doing great work, there'll be one guy who will be like, it's
way more than one person, but yes, I completely understand your idea.
Yeah, precisely. And there'll always be somebody, in fact, I remember when we're talking about creating content online. I remember the first 5 or 10 videos that I put out on YouTube. I had 2 friends, very dear friends, okay, and I respect their opinions a lot. And I became friends with both of them at my internship at Karanjawala & Co. So, and this was around, I think, 10 years ago. So I've known these guys for 10 years now. One guy messages me, says, I loved the video. If I can just give you a little feedback, just speak a little slower because I think you're going way too fast. Wow. And just half an hour later, this other friend, again from Karanjawala, says, if I can give you any advice, just go speak a little faster. I think you're speaking a little slow. They're completely contradicting advice. Wow. And I think they're both right. Both right. Yeah. For the guy who speaks fast and who's used to speaking fast, he wants to hear people talk fast because he's not got the time, right? Yeah. And the person who is a little used to focusing a little more on the words and focusing on what's happening. Right. So I remember I was in a courtroom and there were arguments going on between Mr. Aman Lekhi, who is right now the ASG, and Mr. Mohit Mathur. So Mr. Aman Lekhi had concluded his arguments in a very lengthy arguments in a very complex matter. And then the court asks Mr. Mathur, how much time do you need to address the court? And Mr. Mathur says, see, Mr. Aman Lekhi took around 1 hour. So I will need about 3 hours now because Aman talks about 2 to 3 times faster than everybody else. And that's literally what happens. If you ever see Mr. Lekhi argue in a court, he speaks faster than everybody, like faster than anybody I know. But he's effective. He's able to, convey. I think being authentic is more important. So I think this is the valuable lesson that we can get out of it. Being authentic is more important than trying to fit a narrative in your head. In fact, for the longest time, I used to feel that I need to have a slow, deep voice to convey
radio voice.
Authority. Yes, the radio jockey voice, precisely. I need to have that deep, slow, confident voice that so many other senior lawyers have. Right. But that's not me. And the more of an effort I try to put into not being me, even if it doesn't come across, you are going to get tired much more sooner. And there's a much greater chance that you will give up sooner just because you're not being yourself. And so right now, when I am talking in this slightly comical, slightly animated and like kind of badgering kind of a way, I think that's my most natural self. And I don't feel exhausted. I don't feel fatigued. In fact, I feel energized because I'm being myself. I think that's one valuable lesson that I learned, and I think that people who are watching this,
Mhm.
who are considering starting something like this, creating
Yeah.
something, you don't need to put any unnecessary burden on yourself, and
Mhm.
just kind of be yourself, and it doesn't matter. In fact, on that point, I'll talk about some lesson that I kind of learned very very recently.
Yeah.
So earlier, as a very insecure lawyer, when a
Mhm.
client would come, I would never say, I don't know. The answer would never be I don't know. The answer would
Mhm.
always be, yes, we can do something about this.
Mhm.
Yes, let me strategize. Let me, I mean, there's a bunch of things you can do. Let me
Mhm.
strategize. We'll do this. Don't worry. And now, and because I used to feel that if when the client comes to me and I tell the client that I don't know what you're talking about, or I need time to research upon what you're talking about, the client
Mhm.
will leave and the client will never come back.
Right.
But again, coming back to the point of authenticity, I think, when you are inexperienced, you can use it to your advantage.
Mhm.
You can use it to your advantage. You can kind of play that. You can say, you don't need to convey yourself as an authority on the subject. Right now, tomorrow, if somebody comes to me and says, all right, insurance matters, what do I do over here? I say, I mean, I'm not going to be saying, yes, I can help draft your insurance agreement or your policy, because I've
Mhm.
never done that. But what I do say nowadays to potential clients is that I have not done this and I would love to do it for you. I will take the assistance of experts in the field,
Right.
but because of that, I'll be able to do it at a much lower cost for you,
Mhm.
because I also want to learn how to do this,
Right.
and it would be a pleasure for me to help you out.
Right.
Right? And people appreciate it. So just a
Mhm.
couple, I think majority of my practice is mostly criminal law, right? I do a lot of other stuff as well from time to time, but majority, I think 90% of my practice is criminal law.
Yeah.
And so when around 2 months ago, a company reached out to me and said, we saw your YouTube video.
Mhm.
We've got a lot of high volume, low, high volume, and maybe say, I don't know what to call it, like a lot of advisory work and a lot of legal notice drafting work
Mhm.
that we have for copyright infringement. Do you have any sort of experience in that?
Mhm.
I did not say that I'm an expert. Yes, we can do it for you. And I said, you've reached out to me. I'd love to do copyright matters.
Mhm.
I have done one or two matters in the past. I can showcase those as a skill to you. I can also showcase to you other things I've done in my matters, in different other matters, to show that I am an effective disputes lawyer. And if you take me on board, I would love to kind of help you out in whatever way I can.
Mhm.
And I told them, the first, you're a company, you'll have recurring work. The first thing that I'll do for you, I'll do it for free. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Especially because that company had a decent name, and I knew that they respect they respect everybody. So it's not that they're gonna be that
Mhm.
and even if they don't pay me, it's just a couple of hours of work.
Right.
So I did the first thing for them for free, and I said, we'll think about the cost, we'll think about the fee, we'll
Mhm.
sort all those things out later.
Right.
And it just took maybe like one or two back and forths, and they were happy with the work. And I'm happy to
Mhm.
say that there's still a client of mine 2 months down the line. They are sending me a high volume of work, and I'm quite happy, and in something that I had no experience in. So if a law student says I have no experience, if a lawyer says I have no experience in doing these kind of matters, and they say, if I and a lot of people feel, and I used to also very strongly feel, that it's a catch-22. To get matters, you need to have experience, and to get experience, you need your matters.
Matters.
And
Yes.
that's a vicious circle which you kind of never get out of, really, unless you slave with a senior and learn for several years without any pay. That's bull crap. Okay,
Mhm.
that's nonsense. And I'll tell you, I have seen so many people
Mhm.
first day out of law school
Mhm.
into the practice, because they understand entrepreneurial drives. They
Right.
have started making money from day one. And in
Mhm.
fact, day one is just an abstract concept.
Yeah.
The people who are making money at day one, they've been at it since
Yeah.
I've since at least 2 or 3 or 4 years prior, guys like
Right.
you, right?
Mhm.
So I know this. I have this a dear friend of mine who, in his third year of law school, I think third or his fourth year of law school, um, asked me if he can use my chamber space to entertain a client. I said, of course. I mean, I love you to death. You can use my chamber space to entertain this client. He got the client. He asked me to join in. He was a law student, mind you. I was, I think, in my first year of my practice. He's just maybe a year or two younger than me.
Right.
He used my chamber space. He got the client. He got another lawyer who was also at that point of time associated with one of the top lawyers in the country.
Yeah.
And the three of us sat down with the client and we said nothing. He just introduced, this is Amish Agarwal. He's an advocate practicing in Delhi High Court. This fellow, he is the associate with this top senior lawyer. And, so we are here collectively to help you out with your case.
Wow.
The law student sat and commanded a fee of rupees, I believe it was, I think 2 or 3 lakh rupees. This is several years ago. He commanded a fees of 2 or 3 lakh rupees, and he was able to, and the client was happy to do it because this law student was, driven, committed. He knew the law, of course. I mean, if we were to take charge, if we were to do the entire thing, we would take a big chunk of that money, of course.
Yeah.
But we did not take a penny, right? It was just a small favor that we were, doing to the law student. He did everything, and I'm sure wherever the case had to be done, we were even not even engaged, and we were happy with that. I think he paid a small sum of money to an advocate to actually appear for the client, because of course he could not appear at that point of time. The lesson is that there are so many things you can do. Forget about all these old people who are already settled in their ways. I mean, they are going to starve to death, and they've already made their money, they've made their mark, they've had their struggles. But especially in the pandemic, especially in this digital age, we are doing some incredible stuff. All us young people, I don't know if I can still call myself young. I'm about to turn 30 in a couple of months, but the spirit is still alive. And
well, you're young till 30.
I mean, we can do some. I don't know. So like the moment I grow, yes. I get to 30, I have to get married. I have to first and foremost, I don't know if I get married, I have to stop dating. I have to settle down. I have to buy a house. I have to start. I don't know what else. What else? Adult things are we supposed to do? I don't know. Maybe start contributing to society. Maybe start running for some local municipal elections. Maybe my RW. I think the best way to know that you're old is when you're contesting for an RWA. I think that would be perfect. Resident Welfare Association would be perfect for a guy who turns 30. I think that would be the best thing ever.
I won't debate that. I think you're right. Once you start contesting for RWA, you are adult.
Yeah, I definitely be old. I think there's a certain charm to it. I have a cousin who's now a judge, but when he used to practice law, and I was in law school, I don't. There was this one period I was losing a lot of hair back in the day, around like 10 years ago. One of those days, and I said, "Yeah, I'm losing a lot of hair. I don't know if I can kind of accept the bald look." So Bhaiya said, you should be grateful you're studying law right now, and you should be grateful that if by the time you graduate and you get you're bald or you have white hair, your clients will pay you much more just because of the fact that you're bald. The look of maturity is itself sufficient, because most clients aren't going to ask you your age. They're only going to ask you. They only want to look at how old and withered you look, how frustrated and how stressed out you look the entire time, to see how busy you are. So, and earlier, I think they used to say that having a nice car and a nice office are the only two hallmarks of a successful lawyer. I think nowadays, that's kind of become redundant. Now everyone, like clients, understand that mobile and digital workspaces are more important. Are now the norm, so you don't really need to have a big office. You can be rich, or you can be successful and affluent, and you don't need to have a Mercedes and a BMW. You can make do with smaller cars as well, because you're all about hustling and what do you call it, skimping nowadays, and being environment conscious, right? I believe there's a senior advocate who drives I think I did not see him drive drive it before I didn't see him drive it after he became designated a senior advocate, but I think just before that I definitely used to see him travel all the time in a Reva. So and I mean, it's he's quite well known to have a paperless office and to kind of to encourage environment friendliness. So he has a completely paperless office. He and his team would walk around with their tablets and everything. So he used to travel in a Reva, which my goodness, dude, like your dating life will go to hell if you have a Reva. Do you even know what a Reva is?
I do not. I am Googling it right now while we speak.
You don't know what a Reva is. I'm officially old now.
Oh my god.
I am officially old now.
I feel so embarrassed. I should know what Reva is. Okay. Oh, okay, nice. I haven't found it yet, by the way.
Acha. I like to think that.
Oh, what is this car?
Yes.
This is Reva. Oh my god.
Yes, this is what Reva is.
This is god ugly car.
So yes, exactly. So if you if you don't want to get laid, if you don't want to get laid, if you want to be celibate, just get this car, dude. Yeah, it's the best thing ever.
Yeah.
You and your environment. It's like
saving everything from procreation.
Yes, it's like Leonardo DiCaprio's girlfriend complaining that the relationship is about to end because he has become so environment friendly now that he doesn't want to take a bath because he'll waste water. Wow. He doesn't want to wash his clothes because of the fact that it's gonna be it's harmful to the environment. But anyways, I think we got a little too off topic. This is like law, right? This is law.
No, this is very interesting because you mentioned your YouTube channel and you talk about how there are two major ways how these lawyers and advocates can actually create a space for themselves, and you just mentioned that digital presence is something that is of paramount importance, especially in times like this. So with your YouTube channel, I think all my listeners would want to know that what exactly is the principle behind that channel. You have some of the most wonderful real life pragmatic issues being addressed. You talk about strategies, for example, reading a case file in 5 minutes. It's something that I think every legal intern should go through at least once to actually have an idea as to how to perform in an internship. There are many videos who have a lot of views, and I think a lot of people appreciate that. What exactly is the principle behind it, and what are you trying to convey through these videos?
I was sitting in one of these law practice management classes by Nipun Bhatia for Law Seekho. And he said that it's very important, even if you think that it might not help you much, it's always very good to have a vision statement for your firm, because we were talking about how to build a firm, how to kind of get together as partners. And he talked about the importance of having a mission statement, a vision for the firm, and all of these things. Unfortunately, I don't have any vision, any mission statement. I am just kind of going with the flow. But one thing I will tell you is this on this point here. So people say, when I suggest to law students and lawyers that you should start something of your own and you should do some of these things, they always say, you have experience, you know what to talk about. I don't have an experience. I am yet to get any experience. What do I talk about, right? And I always have to give this example. Okay, so have you ever done an internship? They say yes. I say, did you go to the courtrooms? Yes. Did you read the files? Yes. Did your senior tell you to do some research? Yes. So, you don't need to talk about the law either. You just need to talk about your experiences, because more than the academic concepts is the ability to kind of convey a story that matters more. And I feel that the few people who actually reach out to me and say that I'm doing a half decent job with this kind of content, I think is because they understand that law, especially law, a subject like law, can be very, very dry, right? So I see a lot of people sitting there and talking monotonously about what the judgment said. I say, as lawyers, especially as lawyers, maybe even a year or two of experience, there are 100 things we can talk about, but we don't, because we don't really want to put our opinions out there. I think, and I've not done it for the longest time, because I also think that there is this fear of judgment, fear of being wrong, fear of not being as good as the other guy, right? So
Right.
that's a huge concern that's always there in the minds of people. If I'm talking about cyber law,
Mhm.
how do I top Pavan Duggal? Like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Like, Pavan Duggal's been doing it for the past 30, I don't know, 30, 40 years. Like, you
Mhm.
can't beat Pavan Duggal. But what you can do is you can give your take on it. And
Mhm.
what Pavan Duggal's talking about, you can learn from him and you can put it in your own words,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Pavan Duggal might not simplify to that kind of an extent.
Mhm.
Pavan Duggal is also much older than you. What you
Mhm.
can do is to make it more relatable. Although I must give him credit, Mr. Duggal does do a very good job.
Mhm.
But yet, you can kind of put your spin to it. You can talk about
Yeah.
your experiences. Your experiences nobody else can share, right? So let's do like an exercise right now for
Yeah.
all the law students out there who say, I want to do something like this myself. At least I want to give it a shot,
Right.
but I don't have anything to talk about. All right,
Yeah.
let's talk about the first day of your internship, right?
Mhm.
I got this internship, and how incredibly, how incredibly tedious the whole process is. If you want to like get an internship at a law firm, you keep barraging the HR with requests, and the very last minute they'll be like, okay, all right, come on board, right? And
Right.
so I took an auto, I showed up at the office, right?
Mhm.
I kind of sauntered about, and I didn't know who to go and talk to. I was very I was very shy. I didn't want to disturb anybody. So I went up. I went up to a lawyer. I said I didn't see any reception. So I went up to some guy, I'm presumably a lawyer, and I said, "Sir, I'm an intern today. My first day. Could you just direct me? Like, what should I do? Who should I?" And that lawyer told me, "I don't know. Like, I rushed out." Then I went to this other lawyer, and that other lawyer was like, "Ha, theek hai, you go into that particular room with that little like purple sticker on the door, and there you'll go in, and you'll be pushed in with the rest of the minions, and we'll assign you like a computer. We'll make you sign a non-disclosure agreement saying that you will pay us 10 lakh rupees if you breach any of the data of the firm, or if you kind of steal any of the data of the firm." And then I went and kind of like sat down with the interns. I had interns from A college, B college, C college. We were given this assignment today, and the kicker is that I was given a list of, and this is true for me. Like, first day of my internship, I think in my second year of law school, I was given the drafting of a list of dates.
Yeah.
And I still remember we were placed, and this was in Karanjawala. So we were the interns. I don't know if they've changed the office settings, but back then, around 10 years ago, we used to sit right next to this the room which would house all the mainframe hardware of the office, which was doing all the computing. So they used to have to keep it very, very chilled out, so that the system does not fail, right? And so a lot of these interns, especially because it's the summer months, they would go and sit inside that hardware room. So because you get to enjoy the full blow of the air conditioning. So we're sitting over there on makeshift chairs, like we're sitting on top of files and stuff, and then we're like I'm trying to draft a list of dates, and I'm looking at this and I'm like, dude, this is too much work. Like, this huge file you've given me, and I'm supposed to do a list of dates, and I'm supposed to give it to you by the end of the day. Like, what am I? So I just said, okay, like, chuck it, dude. I'm not gonna put in every single, and the associate said this, every single date. And I was like, agar every single date hua, so then this will run into maybe 30-40 pages long.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, I won't be able to do this. So I decided that I'll choose my judgment to see what's important and what's not in a case that file of which I have not read. And I created like a 3-page long list of dates and I submitted to the associate. This is I'll look at it. Next day I go, the associate is sitting there with his stenographer, and he made that 3-page list of dates into a 17-page list, or I think 17 or 20-page list of dates. And I said, bhai, and he said, bhai, aise kaam hota hai, aise nahi. And that was like my first learning experience, and at a law firm, about and like what kind of work you do over there. Now this entire thing that I said, right, I think it's less to do with what I said, but more to do with the kind of conveyed the story, right? I painted a picture for the person in mind. And so every single law student can talk about it. They can talk about the good things about internships, the bad things about internships. And I mean, that's just one small thing, right? Now when it comes to law, when it comes to actually having, doing something which helps you progress with your career, right? Law, all those judgments are out there. This is not, software, this is not coding, this is not consulting where all the secrets are kept inside. All
Right.
the dirt of what's happening nowadays is up there for everybody to see. And we are
Right.
so much more luckier than people in other countries, because you look at so many other countries, judgments are not available online, right? We can do a lot of bashing in this country, but my goodness, the access to justice is incredible. I have clients, the more literate clients who come to me with their entire case prepared. Like they know what they want from the case, they know what they want, and what the repercussions could be. They understand everything. All they need to do, they want the lawyer to do, is to just file, like to do the drafting, because of course they can't do the drafting, and to go and file the case. I don't have to construct the story myself. I don't have to kind of dig the details out from that. In fact, a lot of times I love it. I love the fact that I tell the client, give me a brief write-up of whatever your situation is, and then I can proceed with the drafting accordingly. That makes my life so much more easier. Much more easier. And what was the point? Yes, being online with this stuff. So you have access to all these judgments, right? Frankly, I am not the best person to talk about corporate law. I don't know. I have the slightest clue about M&A, banking, finance, capital markets, competition. I don't know anything about these things. What I do know is disputes. And when it comes to disputes, everything is out there, right? And and this is what I do half the time. I think the last video I uploaded yesterday was when I read about this particular judgment, and of course I also put my little spin to it. I talked about how I felt that judgment was redundant, and the actual requirement is something which is completely different. But law students, at least young lawyers who maybe don't have anything to do right now, or they don't have any work experience, or they don't have any experiences of their own to share, they can still talk about these judgments, right?
Correct.
They can simplify to a huge extent a very complex 100 or a 80 or 50 page judgment, and that itself creates so much value. In fact, this one recent law graduate reached out to me on LinkedIn and asked me what can be done to get a job, because that person was having a really hard time getting a job. And I told that person, what, and that person conceded, I don't have any experience at all. Okay, I never did internships in law school, so it's a completely lost case, right? And I told the person, all right, keep reaching out to people on LinkedIn, but first and foremost, just make a video, like 2 or 3 videos of yourself talking about anything at all in the law that you find is interesting. And that person, true to the spirit, for God's sake, made those couple of videos, put them out there. And I mean, the person knows, so I can say it very, very freely, extremely bad videos. Okay, what was talked about was, I mean, for me, nonsensical. I mean, just forget about it. Extremely bad. But the person told me that a job was offered, and the employer, an advocate, he said that I did not like the research that you did. I did not like, I did not like the interview either. The interview that I conducted was bad. The only reason why I'm hiring you is because I want to give you a shot, because of the fact that I think that you putting up videos of yourself on the internet shows that you are ready to put yourself out there, and you are ready to do things out of the box, like a little out of the box thinking. You are ready to do, you're open to doing, and that's the only reason why that person got that job. And I think, that for me was like, whoa, dude, like people are getting jobs, and see, I mean, when I do my thing, and I do get clients from the internet, right? I explained how I got a company. I regularly get private clients, a lot of clients, for after they watch my stuff online. But here's the thing, again, people think that I get clients online because of the fact that I had a pretty decent victory, which in a highly publicized matter a couple of months ago. So people think that I get clients because of that. That's partly one of the reasons. But I think, you know, it's in the digital age, if you're not out there every single day doing something, right, you will be forgotten very, very soon. You'll be forgotten very, very soon. So just yesterday, and this is very interesting, yesterday this former acquaintance from several years ago, he, you know, showed up. He said that I got into this particular dispute. Of course, it's ongoing right now, so I won't talk about the details. But he said that, you know, I'm very apprehensive because the possibility of an outcome is very, very low. And I'm very, very apprehensive in giving a lawyer money because I don't trust lawyers at all. And I said, I don't disagree. For every one lawyer who has done a good job, there is a lawyer who has taken the money and then not done anything at all. I like to think that I'm one of the lawyers who takes the money, takes a good amount of money, but then tries my level best to get the client the relief. And I mean, it's not some altruistic reason that I'm doing this. The bigger reason is that I am so afraid that if I do a bad job, I'll have a bad review on the internet, right? And how am I going to answer that, right? That fragile ego, that fragile, you know, sense of myself will be shattered the moment someone says, Amish Agarwal, bad lawyer, I paid him money, didn't show up, didn't fight my case, you know. So that's a huge incentive, right? That's a huge, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
When I started my practice, it was you know, I used to feel absolutely terrible. I used to feel terrible that there would be so many people who would come to me, would say, इस lawyer ने इतने लाख रुपए लिए फिर काम नहीं किया, इस वकील ने काम किया, फिक्स कर दिया, फिर बोलता है कि जी और पैसे दो. And it's horrifying, Kaustubh. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
For me, you know, it's a relationship which is more sacrosanct than father-son, you know, and like husband-wife. More sacrosanct. The person is placing their entire life, the outcome of their life, huge amounts of money, their freedom, you know, their way of life, everything they're putting in your hands. You have to have utmost good faith when you're dealing with clients. And I love the internet for the fact that there is a certain amount of accountability now.
True.
Nowadays,
True.
When someone does not do a good job, people go online and they make sure that the world knows.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
There's a father-son duo of advocates who, I think they used to be a little liberal with their, you know, revenue seeking opportunities, you know, promise a little too much, deliver a little too less, right?
Right.
And this agitated person, he actually created an entire website, and I don't remember the name now. It's been several years, and I know this detail very intimately because that father-son duo had actually shared office space with me at a certain point of time.
Right.
And, you know, the chamber number was the same that was mentioned in that blog post. So that was a huge cause for concern for me and the other people who were there in the chamber. And it was, you know, I mean, you know, at one point of time I was pissed, you know, how can you just like do this? But then I read all the things that were mentioned about them, right? It was not great, you know. I mean, you could see clearly that they had done something wrong, right? They took some money, promised things which would not be possible, and oh my god, dude. Now this reminds me of this other thing. There's an advocate I know, okay, and I was getting this is such a small world, Kaustubh, such a small world. I have people telling me, acha, you know, like, who's this guy, like, you know, I mean, I'm telling them about the case and they're like, who's this guy, like, you know, what does this guy do? And I say, I'll never disclose. I'll give you, you know, I'm sitting with friends and other clients, I'll give details about what's going on. I'll never give names because you never know how this person might know someone who might know that person. I was getting my hair cut, Kaustubh, and the person asked, I think I got a call, so I was talking law for like a minute or two. So the barber, after I cut the call, the barber asked me, sir, aap kya karte ho? I said, I'm a vakil, I'm a lawyer. कहता, सर मैं भी एक वे वकील को जानता हूँ, उसने ना मुझसे लाख रुपए लिए और मेरे से लूट लिए. मैंने कहा क्या हुआ? He said, मुझे बोला कि 30,000 कोट है ना इधर, 30,000 कोट, तो 30,000 कोट में, मतलब that's what he was saying, like 30,000 कोट है ना सर, 30,000 कोट में एक ये वकील, मतलब ये एडवोकेट मिले थे ये, और उन्होंने कहा कि हम तुम्हारी नौकरी लगवा देंगे, सरकारी नौकरी लगवा देंगे 30,000 कोट के अंदर। तो मैंने सोचा देखो, गांव के अंदर, गांव में इज्जत ज्यादा होती है, यहाँ मैं क्या बाल काटता हूँ, ठीक है, पैसे तो उतने ही बनेंगे, पैसे तो अभी ज्यादा बन रहे हैं, पर मैंने सोचा कि सरकारी नौकरी बेहतर रहेगी, इसलिए मैंने उनको ₹1,00,000 दे दिए। उन्होंने कहा कि हमको वो कोर्ट स्टाफ की नौकरी मेरे को लगवा देंगे। अब सर उस बात को 1.5 साल हो गया है, उन्होंने पैसे ले लिए, कहते 1 महीने में काम हो जाएगा। 1 महीने बाद में गया तो कहते कि वो तो अभी टाइम लग रहा है, तो 2-3 महीने और लगेंगे। 2-3 महीने बाद गया तो कहते कि वो तो नहीं हो पाया, मैं तुम्हारे पैसे जो है हम वापस लौटा देंगे। और कहता सर अब 1.5 साल, अब उस बात को जब से बोला था कि पैसे लौटा देंगे 1 साल हो चुका है, अब ना मेरा फोन उठाते ना कुछ। मैं पुलिस पे जाता हूँ, पुलिस वालों को डर लगता है कि वकील है, हमारे ऊपर कुछ ना कर दे। And then that person told me the name of the advocate, and I knew that advocate.
Wow.
That advocate has been at my residence office several times. That advocate, I am ashamed to say that I know that advocate. And you know what do I say to this man? So he said, "आप जानते हो उनको?" मैंने कहा नहीं. I did not want to get into this controversy because how do I get into this? How do I ask a fellow member at the bar,
Right.
colleague, brethren?
Right.
How do I confront a brethren on something so deplorable, Kaustav?
Yeah.
On something so horrifying that I don't know what kind of circumstances you have in life that you would promise someone, you would forget about cases. There is always there have been a lot of situations where I have said that there's a very small possibility, but I say we should still give it a shot. And we have pulled out rabbits out of hats. We have done that from time to time, right? But to say I'll get you, I mean, that's so clearly unethical, completely illegal, something that cannot be done, right? And you know what I say, let's keep aside the legality of it aside for a minute. Let's say this is India after all. If you are doing it, if you do know somebody, and if you are doing it, then all right, chuck it, I'm not going to go on the morality of it. But if you cannot do it, if you promised, you took money and then you don't do it, at least for God's sake, return the money.
Yeah, yes.
At least return the money. Don't say that I put in an effort and it did not happen, because here you did not put any legal effort. You did not even put, at the most, you went to the office of some fellow, you said, I'll give you whatever, 50, 60, 70% or whatever I got, get this person a job. I can only imagine. These are all hypotheses. But I'm saying, look, this is the best case scenario, right? Best case scenario that you went and you did this. You did nothing else. It's not that you went and filed a PIL or that you ran pillar to post or that you sat in the office of that government servant who's gonna get that job, maybe like 50 times to justify that fee, right? If this is not getting done, just return the money, for God's sake. First of all, you can't get it done. Like there are examinations, there are tests, there are all these interviews, all these things happen. There's no guarantee of any sort. But for things like this to happen, now I know for a fact that barber is now online. He sent me a Facebook friend request, and I accepted. And I would love for that barber to go to court, and to confront this errant behavior, right? So this is a great boon for people like you and me, Kaustav, who are actually ready, who want to put in a little bit of effort, to actually do something. I don't know. I don't think I have any altruistic, ambitions to change the society and mold it into my own image. But at the very least, if I'm taking money from a client, I'm going to give fair representation. I'm going to give it my best shot. And I'm quite confident you will as well, right? But, so this is like the big equalizer. These people who, these lawyers. And you know what? My father's been a member of the bar since, I think, past 35 years now. He's been a member of the bar councils of Delhi and then he went up to the BCI for several years. There is a huge there's a huge commitment that my father has towards every single member of the bar, and I would like to think that I share that as well. But this certain behavior, the behavior that I've talked about, that has to go. That cannot continue because it is shameful, it is wrong, it's illegal. And if in this profession, right, there are a couple of things, there are a couple of places where marketing, I say go for it. I mean, sell your Coca-Cola, sell your I don't know, sell your alcohol, sell whatever you want to, right? But when it comes to professions like law, when it comes to professions like medicine, right, I say you do bad taxes, or you do bad auditing, it's all right. It's still manageable. But when it comes to law, when it comes to medicine, when people talk about nobility, I really think they are redundant concepts. But if I do feel a little slightest amount of sense of nobility in this profession, it's that when you are getting into it, when you do take up a client's case, at least do justice. When you do have a patient in front of you, don't go for an invasive surgery just because that makes more money rather than something which is less invasive, or some procedure which is and I think both these industries have become like that. But I think, again, coming back to the internet, internet has become the biggest equalizer of them all. Now there are, so I was talking to some other person. I'm planning to try and become an advocate on record very soon. I gave the advocate on record exam last year. I just could not clear this one leading cases exam, and so I thought to myself, anyways, there's not much AOR work being done right now, so even if I did not clear, it's not a big deal. Whenever the notification comes out, I'll give it a shot. But the more interesting point is that I feel now there is less of a benefit in becoming an AOR now. So recently, just like last month, I got a call from a lawyer based out of Lucknow who told me that she needed to file an appeal in the Supreme Court, file an SLP. And so I asked her, because I could sense it. So I asked her, do you want like the drafting and the filing and the arguments to be done by the AOR, or do you just need an AOR to sign off on that petition?
Right.
So the woman said it's the latter. I'll do the drafting. I'll do the, filing also. Whatever, just like the filing needs to be done with the signature of the AOR. And I'll do the arguments as well. I just need the signature of the lawyer, the AOR. And I thought, whoa, like this is a bad time to be an AOR right now. Like right now, anybody can approach. Like the reason why AORs had a flourishing practice, the most of them who did have that flourishing practice, the only reason was that, filing, you can understand, you can get a draft and you can do your filing. But they understood, like, and AORs, the only reason why it would happen was that because it would not make sense for a lawyer from Gujarat or Karnataka or West Bengal to fly down, stay here, like get the matter listed and then wait for your matter to come up and then argue it before the court. Now they can do it sitting in their house anywhere in this country and in the world for that matter. They just need an AOR to sign off. Right. So it's a bad time to be an AOR. But I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad at all. You know what the reason why? Because I say I was this person, I said, all right, so maybe my hopes of being an AOR and having a flourishing practice in the Supreme Court where I rush around and do a bunch of matters every day, those plans are in a little bit of a jeopardy. But on the other hand, if they do take up online conferencing and online video conferencing and make it mainstream, they will do it across the country. And when they do it, then this Delhi lawyer sitting over here will also be able to effectively argue matters in Bombay, in Kolkata, in Indore, in some small village where there are high stakes matters and the client says, we want the best of the best. And then again, it'll be people like you and me, not the village Chaudhary Vakil who has a complete monopoly. In fact, I've seen this everywhere. Everywhere you go in the smaller towns, there will only be two advocates. who will have 90% of the cases, and they will keep appearing against each other the entire time. There will be advocate Mr. A, there will be advocate Mr. B, who will also be in all likelihood president and vice president of the bar, or president and whatever secretary of the bar association. And they and they will have an entire monopoly over the entire thing. Right? I got a call a couple of months ago from this person who had a dowry harassment case filed against him by his wife, and he said, "Sir, I live in Bombay. My wife lives in this small town in Maharashtra, and I went to the court over there, and I asked lawyers, and every lawyer over there is ready to fight my entire case for rupees 10,000. Entire case, start to end, they're ready to fight it for 10,000 rupees. But the problem is that there's not one decent lawyer. Like, I talked to them about things. I talked to them about the judgments I found, the facts that I should kind of, put in my reply. They know nothing at all about anything. What am I supposed to do? Like, I'm ready to pay them much more money, but they're just ill-equipped. So he retained my services sitting in Delhi to, advise him and to do the drafting for him so that he can file it. And then he said, you know what? I don't even need a lawyer over here. I'll argue my matter myself. And the only reason why he still has a lawyer right now is because the judge mandated that you must hire, because this is another, monopoly inducing kind of thing that local bar associations do.
Right.
If you are appearing, if an outside counsel is appearing, you need a local counsel's wakalatnama. If you don't, a bunch of, the lawyers will come, they will protest, they will strike in the court. So what happens when these lawyers strike? They strike because they know that there's no other way to enforce our demand, right? And the people who suffer the most are the young entrants, the ones who are hungry, who will do anything for their client, right? Us younger lawyers, we don't care about strikes, right? But is the more elder people in the profession who will want to enforce it and say, no, we are doing it for the common good. I don't see any common good for you fighting to have local councils over here. I would rather have a much more open. In fact, people talk about foreign lawyers coming in. I am quite confident any like some lawyer from Allen and Overy is not going to show up over here and going to fight a matrimonial case or a murder case over here. Right. All they're going to do is to fight, maybe high stakes arbitration matters, maybe high stakes court cases which involve, crores and crores of rupees, right? So advocates like me right now who are not getting into those kind of disputes, we are not affected, right? The common the common man advocate, which is 95% of the entire country, right? They're not going to get affected by foreign law firms coming in,
right?
But who is there in the leadership of the bar who is saying that foreign lawyers should not be allowed to practice because they will usurp the work? Like Matthew from Wilmer Hale will come and file a civil suit for infringement of copyright or infringement of patent in some small village in Haryana. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. People like you and me suffer. And I feel that if foreign law firms do come in the country, they would love to hire people like you and me to go and fight their cases in a court of law. You, me, and all these other lawyers, they would love for us to. And the best part about these people coming in would be that they will bring in best practices from their own organization, and they will. One is that they will challenge us to be a better version of ourselves, right? And secondly, because we'll be in close association with all these people, there will be growth by osmosis. I would like to think that I am quite confident when I address arguments in a court of law, only because I had my ass handed to me for the first 3 or 4 years of my life by senior counsels, by very senior lawyers, because I was running around in court and struggling and getting defeated quite often in a court of law by these people. And because of that, I would like to think I'm slightly quick on my feet when it comes to making arguments. I'm able to kind of perceive the mood of the court, the strategy of the other side. I'm able to preemptively do a bunch of things. I would like to think I'm quite good at that. because of the fact that I lost so much. I would
Mhm.
love for some foreign company and some, Philip and Matthew and John to come in and say that, out with you. I'd love for someone to challenge me and say, this is like, this is what you are doing wrong, and this is how you need to improve. Right? I constantly look at other people and see what can I improve in myself. Right? I mean, one thing is the professional growth, the other is the personal growth, and the more you grow personal as a person as well, that will help you in your profession as well. Right? I think I've gotten way out of, completely lost track of things.
No. I
Just
think
kept going on
this
and on.
is very important. This entire, I think, as a law student who interns and who tries to learn obviously the paralysis that we face is that we know very little about the real life practice, the court, the real life practice at the court, how the court functions, and the best we get to learn about this is when we get to intern. Possibly learning from the stories of people who've actually experienced it firsthand and are ready to share it with the law students is a very effective way, I believe, for all of us to actually learn about these things. So please, I think this entire section of conversation will send out a very positive message. We've had principles like ethics, morality being covered. We've talked about all these things. Before we end our conversation, I just have a last question for you. I think this is something that I need to ask you. You mentioned that quite recently you've had a very celebrated case, a win. I won't name the case, but the fact that it engulfed the kind of the public debate on media trial, it involved a lot of sensitive matter. Yet a very important principle came out that media trials can have some very devastating effects. So from you, learning from you, I think will give us the best impression and the best understanding of this entire issue. How bad can media trials be? How bad or how devastating can its effects be? And how we as legal professionals, what can we learn from this entire debacle that you faced?
Okay. Two parts. How bad can they be, and what can we as lawyers learn from this? I mean, Saravjit has put out his story several times, talking about how one small argument with a person on the street ruined his life, and I'd like to think the man has emerged stronger. But I do, like, whenever I talk to him, still, there's always this underlying sense of resentment that I have. He does not. He's a very nice guy. He never has this kind of resentment. But I have a lot of resentment about how people, the public in general, the courts, everybody treated him. It was very, very bad. And you don't see it now. Like, I mean, forget about Saravjit. There are so many people who keep doing these kind of things, right? There is judgment. There is, and I think I understand why this happens. I am on social media a lot, and I see all these people constantly sharing only negative things, right? So any kind of sensational work is fantastic for higher viewership, which means which translates into more eyeballs on the sponsors, which translates into more ad revenue. So it's, I mean, there's a huge financial incentive for media companies to sensationalize as much as possible. And so Arnab Goswami going on the air without there being any proof. It's one thing to say that there is an allegation. There's an allegation that this thing happened. There's these are the allegations. The incident is allegedly of so and so date. The man goes out and calls him a monster, calls him a darinda, calls him a pervert. All of these people, the things that they do, it is nothing short of cyber terrorism. This is nothing short of cyber terrorism, which can have greater effects. Which, I mean, if you come up to me and slap me in person, it will have a very, very short effect, right? I mean, I'll feel humiliated. Maybe 10 people saw it, and maybe they'll go and tell 10 more people, right? But that'll be the end of it. It'll be forgotten soon.
Right.
Now you do anything on the internet, and it is stuck there for life. And the cruel way the media is out there to get you. Saravjit, everybody knows. So the story, you can always Google Saravjit Singh Bedi. You will have a lot of articles about Monster, a lot of articles about falsely accused, whatnot. I'll give you another great example of how the media is, I mean, I can't think of, when I think of the media nowadays, the only image that comes to my, I don't think about, the fourth pillar of democracy. I don't think about freedom of speech. I think the only image that comes to my mind is a bunch of hungry wolves. Okay.
Yeah.
That is what comes to my mind. And I'll give you that's a fantastic example. A writ petition was filed. I was there coincidentally. I was there in another matter. So I was witnessing the whole thing going on in court. This writ petition was filed by this man who was based out of Dubai, who was an Indian origin. His wife filed a case against him in India. And him and his mother. So the matter kind of went on, and ultimately it was settled. So now assuming his name is Mr. Whatever, Ashwin Kumar. Okay. So if you go and Google his name, the first result that comes on Google is state versus Ashwin Kumar. Okay. And the two lines of description that is there below every search result, it says accused of beating wife, right? So Ashwin Kumar comes to High Court and says that the thing is, my wife filed a case against me and my mother. We settled it amicably out of court. The judgment, the order just reflects that, if you actually open the order talks about the allegations, but then also talks about the reconciliation and the fact that the matter is settled. So he only says, kindly remove my name from the court records, keep it confidential, because I am in a position, I'm in a job where everyone keeps Googling my name, and the moment they see this, Ashwin Kumar accused, they back off. They don't want to deal with me anymore.
True.
So the court says, how can I expunge public record? Right. So they say, okay, the next argument is, can kindly at least tell Google to take this down as a search result, because my problem is not so much with state versus Ashwin Kumar. The problem is that Google Baba, does this insane thing. And so every time someone searches for me, the first thing that comes is Indian Kanun, because of the fact that it has a much better, search, like the SEO optimization, right? But here's the clincher. The court says, no, we are not going to issue any interim orders for sure. Let the state file their reply. Let Google or whoever it is, let them file their reply. And here's the kicker. The counsel say, my lord, there are these 50 journalists who are standing in the back of the court for this particular case. At least this court may pass an order saying that no journalist should, make a news article of this particular thing that I'm doing. And sure as hell, 5 days after this, and the judge said, no. 5 days after that incident, I actually Googled that person's name because I wanted to see. And this is exactly what happened. Search number 1 still is state versus Ashwin Kumar. Second search result is Hindustan Times. Person wants name removed from system. Court issues notice. Ashwin Kumar. Ashwin Kumar was accused of his wife in this case. Third result. Ashwin Kumar comes to court to get his name removed. Fourth result. India Times, Hindu, all of these things, right? And they are brutal. They are, and when the counsel said, my lord, may at least restrain the media from reporting on this incident, I could literally hear several very, very light snickers from the back of the courtroom, because everyone was, waiting for some masala to come out. Oh, freedom of speech. How do we, Subodh Gupta. I don't know if you know about Subodh Gupta's incident. Subodh Gupta there's this Heard and Send Instagram account. They want to out perpetrators and creeps in the art fraternity. So an anonymous person gives an anonymous information to Heard and Send account, which is also anonymous. There's no attribution to who is the creator of Heard and Send, who is the manager of Heard and Send. And Heard and Send says Subodh Gupta sexually harassed this particular person. So the media everywhere picks up Subodh Gupta molester, Subodh Gupta creep. Subodh Gupta files a defamation case, civil suit for damages for 5 crore rupees, and says that a person who is defaming me, that person should seek the remedy in law. They don't come to court because they don't have any proof, because things don't happen. I don't know if things happen or not, but at least they don't have any proof. That's why they're not coming to court. And they also want to stay anonymous and then publicly defame me. That's not going to happen. And the Delhi High Court agreed. And it is when the Delhi High Court told Instagram that you disclose the name of the operator of Heard and Send, that Heard and Send sent a lawyer and said, we are sorry, we are ready to compromise, please don't sue us. So this is what's going to happen now. When a man like Subodh Gupta, now in this case Subodh Gupta, he is defamed, he has to go to court, pay anywhere between 5 to 15 lakh rupees to his lawyers to fight the case, seek 5 crores in damages, which means file about 5 lakh rupees as court fees cost them. 5 lakh rupees as court fees in the court of law because he's seeking damages of 5 crore rupees. And then he gets somewhere. And then the person comes and says, we apologize. We take it back. And let's end the matter. The man lost all his possessions, all respect in the art world. He is always going to be looked at with suspicion. And the person just said sorry. Partly this is the system, the legal system of this country. And the other part, the other big part is the media. And especially, I believe, social media. And, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter. Oh my God, Twitter. And I mean, I'm not even on Twitter because of that. I'm not even on Twitter. I say I don't even want to get into this, bunch of, I'll just come up with a bunch of adjectives. So, and a lot of people are talking about Sushant Singh Rajput. This fellow, Manav Singh, he committed suicide because a girl very ambitiously said that this man attempted to rape me 2 years ago. Have you heard of this story?
No, I have
the
not.
boys' locker. So this was because of the boys' locker room. When boys' locker room happened, this woman said, now I saw boys' locker room. That's why I can't hold it in anymore. And I don't have any proof. But I'm telling you that this man 2 years ago attempted to rape me. Okay. And the moment she put that story up on Instagram, a bunch of people of the public started calling up this kid.
Oh, okay. Yes. I am aware of the story. This kid committed suicide because of the alleged rape case that happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, there's no case. There's no case that was filed by this girl. She just goes on the internet, on Instagram, and she posts it. Her friends share that. 17-year-old Manav Singh Kaustab jumps to his death.
Yeah.
He now has a father who has no other child, who said that he spent his entire life for the benefit to set up something for his child. And now that child is no more. For no other reason than the social media, than a person who wanted to get some attention on the internet and her friends. So right now I'm representing Manav's father, and so I am privy to much more information about the case than even what the public knows. And I can quite confidently say whatever we have come to find out, we will of course put it in a court of law as well. We have concrete proof to, at least beyond reasonable doubt, acquit the deceased kid, Manav, to be 100% sure that nobody would have, when we present that proof in the court, there'll be no doubt in anybody's mind that Manav indeed did not ever attempt to rape this girl.
Right.
But the damage is done. The fact that he'll be able to prove the innocence of his son is not going to get his son back.
So just to clarify, there was no criminal complaint filed by the girl. There was no proceeding, nothing, no filing, nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Nope. Nothing at all. One Instagram story which was shared by her friends and was then further shared by 500 more people. And because of what this kid saw was happening to him, he jumped to his death.
Wow.
And so there's no doubt in my mind that there has to be repercussions for actions like these. Anyways, part 2. What can lawyers do in this kind of a thing? Equip yourself with laws of defamation in this country. Go through every resource that's out there. Go through judgments, so that when something like this happens to your client or your potential client, or you for that matter, you can approach the relevant courts. And there are a lot of things that you need to take care of. Otherwise, that case goes out of the window. If you read perhaps 50 to 100 judgments on defamation laws, civil as well as criminal, you'll see how hard it is to actually secure a conviction or to secure a verdict for the plaintiff. It's very, very difficult. So you need to be very, very thorough. Spend at least 100 to 200 hours researching, making notes and understanding the laws of defamation. and then being able to, and I think that's a great space for people to showcase their skills, so that if someone feels defamed like this, they can also do it, right? I got a call from a lawyer who practices tax law a couple of months ago, and he told me that he posted something about someone, and then that person's followers started calling him, harassing him, chasing him. So he was also not quite confident about how to approach the whole defamation cases.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of scope for lawyers and law students also to kind of in this space now, the digital space of defamation. There's a lot which can be done, and keeping yourself abreast with all of what's happening is one short way of kind of having better jurisprudence and making people understand that you can't willy-nilly go and defame people on the internet just because you're sitting in the comfort of your room and your your username is your actual name is not visible and your username is hotboy79. That's not gonna work. These things you have to have a little bit of accountability, and for Sarabjit also, there was a certain sense of justice after all of this that happened. But the only thing that I think about, what I still kind of mull over, is that this guy almost lost his case. I mean, I'd like to be modest about most things in life, but this thing I'm quite, because the way his case was going, he would have definitely lost his case if I had not entered, if I had not stepped in, because it was a complete, like, his previous court appointed legal aid counsel did a tremendous job of helping the girl win. Otherwise there would have been a definite conviction. And I just wonder, there are so many people who are not maybe able to afford lawyers, who maybe are not able to, at that point of time, were not able to collect good evidence. There are a lot of times you are not wrong, but you don't have proof. What happens to those kind of people? So of course, I mean, there has to be a certain amount of self-restraint that everyone must understand, and apart from that, there has to be very, very strict enforcement mechanisms. I mean, those mechanisms are there, good or bad, whatever they are there, but people's awareness about those implementation mechanisms and people's willingness to actually go to a court of law and have those implementation mechanisms actually enforced, that is something which is very, very crucial.
Right. I think this is extremely important. As someone who's listening to this idea and is trying to understand, I can very perfectly draw the connection, the nexus between two situations. I think the accountability that, if generated through someone's social media posts or their said statements and actions when it gets attached with cases like defamation and others, can directly give us the idea that, okay, perhaps we can add certain credibility to such allegations that, for example, sexual abuse allegations that surface on social media, if have the credibility, because the defamation proceedings will then hold them accountable. There will be repercussions for your actions. So if you cannot hold up to the repercussions, you cannot stand up to the if you're not even willing to file case, or you can file a complaint before the said authorities, possibly your social media post is doing the wrong kind of damage in sending, and is actually questioning the credibility of this entire, let's say, hashtag #MeToo movement or any of the such movements, is actually detrimental to such principles. But
I understand what happened, like why people do it. Like, we talk about the hashtag #MeToo movement, and I am not, I'm not really opposed to the idea of women coming out and naming accusers, but I mean, what happens, like, when you are encouraging a person to step out after 10 years and accusing somebody, and that person facing the repercussions and actually actually suffering, not repercussions, but actually suffering damage because of your allegations, you are encouraging other victims to wait it out and then file a case. But if at the threshold itself, in a few matters, you explain that these kind of actions will not stand, right? If you are coming out and accusing someone after 5 years, 10 years, even 1 year for that matter, you will be taken to court, you will have to pay damages and maybe even go to jail. So instead, what you need to do is, you have to make up your mind about what happened and at what moment. And so even if you're a rape or a harassment or a molestation accused, or if you're a victim of any of these things, or you're a victim of theft or robbery or dacoity or or hurt, You're not supposed to wait for a couple of weeks or a couple of months and make up your mind about what's happening and then go and do it.
Right.
You people have to be trained that
Mhm.
for your case to have a certain amount of credibility, you need to approach not the social media, not the high court of WhatsApp and Instagram,
Mhm.
but the actual police, the actual courts to get justice. Because the moment there is any delay,
Mhm.
that goes against you, and that is why convictions, in actual cases where offenses happen, where
Mhm.
women are molested and women are assaulted and women are raped,
Mhm.
there is no conviction
Yeah.
because of the fact that the woman was in shock maybe, or
Mhm.
whatever it was. But then even then you have to encourage women to immediately step up and name your
Right.
accuser,
Right.
because then there is DNA, there is semen samples, there
Mhm.
is the clothes, there is the communication between the parties, there is a location of where you were,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
You're encouraging people to actually think about things and not call up 100 number. I say anything happens to you, especially as a woman victim, anything happens to you, the slightest thing happens to you, you might even be in doubt, just call up that number right now and
Mhm.
call up the police and give all that proof, so that this asshole who has violated your privacy, he goes to jail.
Right.
He does not go scot free.
Mhm.
You don't spend the night after you sleep with the man. If he forced himself on you, you don't sleep there and then go and I'm sorry, I'm making a little controversial. If you want, you can edit it out, but this is what I personally feel, okay? And of course you are not liable for anything that is being said over here. I'm the one who's liable, but I strongly feel about this, right?
Mhm.
If we encourage women to wait, that's what's going to happen. They are going to wait longer, and people will go scot free. Actual rapists, molesters, assaulters will go free. That's something I have a huge grouse about.
Right. Right. I think it's important for me to just give you bring out a particular line of argumentation that is used from the other side, and I'll very quickly just put it out. So that one of the arguments is that women, uh, in order to encourage women, in order to file the complaints, let's for example call the 100 number immediately, they need to be comfortable with the system. There are multiple instances, like evidence is the fact that women are not comfortable with the law enforcement authorities. The system is not designed in a way to suit the fact that women can actually complain immediately, or they're the victims of such perpetrators who are in a powerful position, who then push women not to or until they find position where they are safe, or after a long period of time when they actually are out of the influence of that powerful person. So this is one line of argumentation that is used from the other side, why let's say complaints being filed after certain years should be considered, or let's say why the judgment from the Karnataka High Court is being criticized at this moment, that possibly there must have been other circumstances. What is your comment on that?
You know what, I actually agree with you.
Mhm.
This is something that I didn't really even think about, right? The fact that there are a lot of situations where a woman is not in the right situation. She is maybe pressurized. There could be pressure from family.
Mhm.
There could be several other things as well. So then maybe there has to be a little bit of leeway. There has
Right.
to be then maybe there has to be a little bit of leeway.
Right.
But at the very least I would say that if you're doing something, at least don't go on social media and say it, right?
Correct.
At least file a court case, for God's sake. I can understand that after filing your case you approach social media, because a
Social
lot of
media.
times the police only act because of public pressure.
Mhm.
I get that. But for you to go on social media and write it and not file a complaint,
It's completely
even if you are an actual victim,
Mhm.
that completely casts a huge shadow of doubt on your intentions, right? So if you know what, you are right, Costa. It is a nuanced point. I guess I got carried away because of the fact that
Principally,
I
I
fight
think
a
I
lot of.
completely agree with you. I think principally when we talked about the major idea, as you mentioned, the case that you're going to represent soon has real life repercussions. If you do not back your own social media statement, which has real life repercussions, it's not like you just start losing followers just because someone has put up a post against you. It's just that it affects your life in real life, and there are people who have committed suicide as a result of that. I principally completely agree with you. Most of the points I completely agree with you. It's just this point I needed someone like you, who's an expert with criminal procedure or criminal law, who's dealt with real life victims and real life accused as well, you have gone through a situation. How do you possibly see this, and how do you possibly find a solution? Because I think both of us are on the same ground, that the system needs to make it more conducive for the victims to possibly come out and have immediate complaint response.
You know what, I am, of course, there is no doubt about that. We are in complete agreement. But I would confess, what you say makes sense. It's just, perhaps it's just like my worldview dictated by the actual practice of what goes on, right? And that is why you never see a conviction happening in a belated case. In fact,
Right.
it kind of pisses me off a little as well, because when you see an actual, assailant, when you see an actual perpetrator also go scot-free,
Yes.
even that itself is a huge atrocity in itself. It's not just men who are falsely accused, but someone who's actually a perpetrator, who in that moment is able to get away because of the fact that because of a small maybe delay on the part of the victim. That is also quite unacceptable. And
Right.
and therefore, long story short, I understand the system is like this. There are measures in place. I would still encourage victims to come out and speak as soon as possible. Not
Absolutely.
wait for hours, days, months, or years.
Absolutely.
And at the same time also, like, for the people in the legal fraternity who are talking to us right now, who are kind of watching us right now, to also spread the awareness of why it is not just important to talk about all the other principles about equality and prevention of violence, but also to talk about the legal aspects of why it is important to immediately go to court. Why is it important to preserve evidence? Why is it important to kind of prepare your testimony, do all of these things which are required for a victim to actually prove his or her case in a court of law.
Right.
Yeah, but I definitely need a little more time to kind of introspect on what I just said.
I think
Because you did present a very valid point. I would not want to have my ego and say that I am completely right and you're wrong. I think you made some very valid point, and
I think
that does make sense.
So I think you're just being very humble as of this moment. But the reason why I have even sparked this conversation here, as you've mentioned, this issue is extremely sensitive and very much in the gray area. But as law students, there are multiple angles to this argumentation, as you have represented a lot of, let's say, the men who have been falsely accused. You have a real life first hand experience with the effects of such false accusations, which possibly needs to go out and should also somehow trigger the change that will ultimately will affect the system and will ultimately affect the victims as well. Possibly the only way I could have learned about this and have such a free flowing conversation, possibly this casual of a conversation, is if I could have spoken it with you, and I have had that opportunity. I don't think I would trade this portion of this conversation with anything else. This kind of independence, if awarded to the students by the leaders and the luminaries in the field, will completely transform the legal education system, is in my perspective. And but I believe the idea that we have discussed throughout this conversation, we talked about the various experiences that you've had, especially with respect to your experiences in law schools, your experiences with litigation, your suggestions for law students, and how digital's presence and everything will add so much tremendous amount of value to every law student, every legal aspirant who tunes into this podcast. I had personally a wonderful time, a ball having this conversation with you. I hope that you had a good time too.
It's fantastic, man. Sunday well spent.
Most certainly. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for this amazing opportunity of mine.
It was a pleasure, man. I'll see you around then.
Thank you.